The greatest realization you'll ever have in life is brought about by your karma. And when I say realization, I'm talking about two different things. First is self-realization. So this pathway of karma teaches us how to attune to our highest selves, how to let that out into the world. But also it's this knowing or understanding, realizing that things have an underlying structure to them. And that the universe has mechanics that we can understand. At the same time, this word karma is a loaded word. A lot of us have associations or expectations around it. What I need from you to do as you're taking this in is basically what the 40-second gene key teaches us. We have expectation, and that expectation is there to teach us detachment. So that's my ask of you is, can you detach from how you've seen karma in the past? Which typically when people hear karma, they think of cause and effect. I did this action, and so this thing shows up in my life. And it's just not that simple. There's so much more that's underlying that. For example, there's this veil that we cross back and forth across as we go from this Maya, this embodied world, back to the world of the soul. And there are things that happened on the other side of that veil that can absolutely affect our karma while we are here and while we are present. And so sometimes we don't remember what the causes are that are leading to the effects. Always there's a sense of universal justice. There's this sense of balance that is how the universe operates. But oftentimes we can't see that balance because we don't remember. So your Dharma, which is the last video that I made, I released that last week, manifests in your life through your karma. So if you think about the path that you are on as your Dharma, so think about this road that your soul is going down. Your body is the car, it's the vehicle that's traveling down that road. Your karma is the engine of that car. It's the motor that pushes you further down the pathway of your Dharma. And if we look at this from a Gene Keys profile perspective, we've got down here the sphere of purpose, coming up here to the sphere of attraction, and this is the pathway of Dharma. And then coming out of that attractor sphere, over here we've got the sphere of our IQ, and this is the pathway of your karma. So your soul realizes its greatest lesson through your karma, which is released through your attractor field. So this is where we learn about the lesson that we were coming here to get this time around on the earth. So the pathway of karma connects the sphere of attraction to the sphere of IQ. Your attraction calls it in. Then we get into the deep Venus work. So what comes out of IQ is our EQ and our SQ. And this triad, IQ, EQ, and SQ, are what Richard calls the coal face of the Venus work. This is ultimately what our astral body needs to go through as we raise the frequency through those spheres in order to continually raise our vibration and continue to walk our pathway of Dharma and ultimately settle into our body and fulfill our purpose. So the Venus work dictates how we interact with what we call in via our attractor field, which shows up through the pathway of karma. So if you think about this bottom section here as sort of like the mechanics of the universe, and this top section here is how we interact with those mechanics. And so as you transmute your shadows, what you attract via your sphere of attraction begins to shift. And that's because each thing that you call into you through this sphere of attraction along your pathway of karma contains the perfect set of lessons to further refine your soul, to get you that much closer to the lesson that you're meant to learn this time around. And every relationship that you have contains karma within it that is designed to be transformed. Doesn't matter if it's a romantic relationship with a boss or with a child or a spouse. All of them have a bank of karma that we are here to learn from, grow from, and transform. And if you turn away from that bank of karma, which we all do from time to time, somebody rubs us the wrong way and we decide that we are going to move on instead of sitting in that discomfort. But when we do that, that lesson always circles back around, just gets recycled. Our attractor field calls it back in, our karma makes it show up, and then we have another opportunity to engage with our IQ, EQ, and SQ to handle things a little bit differently this time. And the most powerful relationships that you have in your life are actually those relationships that you really struggle with. Those relationships that contain the juiciest, hardest things. A lot of times this is our parents, or our brother or sister, or you know who this person is. The one that we want to deal with the least often is the thing that's holding so much potential energy back, because remember, that person is just a reflection of you, and what you see in them is something that you know is contained in yourself. And it might manifest a different way, but the seed, the quintessence of that energy is inside of you, and that's why it bothers you so badly. Knowing that, though, we can reflect on our relationships in a different way. We can look at them through that lens of wisdom and teaching and love. And that, over time, gradually softens us to the people that we run into. It softens us to our reactions to the people that we run into. Because oftentimes, not only do we get mad at the person, but then we get mad at ourselves for reacting in a certain way. Karma, where's my eraser? I'm gonna go grab my eraser. Karma equals chemistry. That's important to know. When you feel that juice between you and another person, that is the charge of karma. And it doesn't have to be a romantic chemistry. There's lots of people that you run into that you just know that there is something there. And that is that bound up karma waiting to be released. When two people interact with one another, right? Imagine that this is an aura, person A, and this is an aura, person B. And our attractor's field starts to pull A and B together. And what we end up with is this new field, this field C. And that is the karma of the relationship. It also is the unity between the two. Two doesn't lead to two. Two leads to three. If you've been following the Terrence Howard stuff, 1 times 1 equals 2. In this case, 1 and 1 actually equals 3. So karma is a tricky thing because this attraction can be really, really strong. And in the beginning, through our magnetism and through our sexuality, we get a glimpse of our perfection in that other person. This is that intense new love, that intense new relationship where all you can see is with the eyes of love. That person can do no wrong. And what you're seeing again is a reflection of you, of your purity, of your perfection. But before long, that karma starts to unwind and the shadows start to show themselves. And then the relationship gets real. But that shadow that comes forward, that is the point of the relationship. That is how we learn our lessons. That is how we, over time, raise our frequency. And that's how relationships can be our teacher. Relationships can actually be the new spiritual path. The new path of the seeker is actually at our home, in our lives, in our day-to-day. It's not out there. It's not following a certain guru or going to join a certain group of people. It's all about the things that are already present in your life. And the Venus sequence beckons to us right from our own living room, right from our own bedroom. And it is just waiting and dying for you to learn the lessons that it's serving up to you every single day. But it requires a ton of bravery because you are tinkering with your day-to-day life. There's no separation. You don't get to leave and go to India. It's here, it's now, and you know that the work that you do and the interactions that you have with people are going to affect your day-to-day. And that can be scary. Change can be scary. You can't predict what's going to happen when you start walking down this path. Over and over again, the Venus work calls us to our suffering. And there we have an opportunity to surrender to that suffering. When suffering comes, we get two choices. The high vibration response is to surrender into that suffering. That does not mean quit. It does not mean give up. It does not mean you're a victim. What it means is you're willing to learn from it. You're willing to be in it. You're willing to sit with it because you know that the universe is serving something helpful once you get to the other side or even in it. The other option that you have with suffering is the masculine response. It's to try and fix it, to do something to change the situation. And we've been taught over and over again that that is the response. You're suffering, you did something to put yourself into suffering. Not true. Suffering can just come. Read the story of Job in the Bible, for example. And then from there, it's up to you to take action. You need to do something to get out of that suffering. And although that might be true, the doing takes place internally. There's nothing external that needs to happen most of the time. The changes take place in here. It's opening your heart more widely to the situation that is presenting itself to you. All the longing you feel to stop or to change the suffering is you seeking yourself. It's you looking for the love that you contain. Your desire for something else is your desire for your own internal self-love to come forward. It's just in there waiting to be released, and you're suffering because it is dying to come out. This work isn't about adding anything to you. It's about releasing the energy that is trapped inside, that is stuck underneath our conditioned responses to most everything that we do. The Venus work is addition through subtraction. There's a story that Richard tells. Never remember where it is, but it's this old fable, and I've said it before, so forgive me if you've heard this before. But there's a woman who lives in a farmhouse, And she goes to an old wise man and says, my house is just too small. I need a bigger house. And the wise man tells her, go home and take in your pig. And so she brings her pig into her house, and she goes back to the wise man and is like, okay, I brought in my pig, nothing happened. He says, go home and take in your goats. She goes, she takes in her goats. She looks around and her house is still exactly the same. Goes back to the wise man and says, nothing changed. And he said, take in your chickens, take in your cattle, take in every animal that you have. And she goes home and she brings everything inside, and it is just mayhem, chaos. Everything is crazy, but her house is still exactly the same. And she doesn't understand. So she goes back to the wise man and says, look, I got goats on my kitchen table. I got cows drinking milk out of the fridge, but my house is still the same size. And the wise man says, go back home and take all those animals back outside of your house. So she goes home and she slowly ushers everything back outside into their fields, into their barns, into their pens. And she goes back inside and she realizes how big her house actually is, how much room she actually has. That is the Venus work. It's just noticing what is already inside, what is already there. The gene keys ask us to see the people in our lives as a reflection of us. We project how we are feeling, what we're thinking onto the person that's across from us. It is so hard to hear what somebody is actually saying and to not be thinking as they're saying it. And because of that, the people that are in our lives that are trying to get things across to us, it's like we see just like a faint glimmer of them. And it's clouded when we're in the shadow by all of our stuff, by what we have going on. If you've ever heard of the allegory of the cave, if not, definitely, there's actually a really good after school on YouTube about the allegory of the cave. That is a myth from Plato. And essentially, there's this, that's a fire. There's this fire. And in front of the fire, there are, let's call it some men and some women that are on sticks. And over here is a cave wall. And on this cave wall, we're seeing the shadows of the people from the fire. We're not actually seeing the people, right? We have our eyeballs looking this way, even though the reality is back there. And our job is to try and see our relationships for what they are. Our spiritual teachers. Our job is to remember that we have an opportunity to respond differently to our karma, to act in a different way. And it only takes one person to change how the relationship goes. So often we fall into the trap of thinking that, okay, if I'm changing, I expect different things from you. If I'm gonna do this, I want you to do that. But changing a relationship only takes one person. And that can feel unfair, but remember, there's only one person here to begin with. My work is their work. As I change, the relationship dynamic has to change. The relationship, if you remember that A and B sphere, is an interaction between us, creating this new third field. And if one of the two components that go into creating that field change, then the field itself also has to change. So as you transmute your shadows, you also transmute the shadows of the other. It can be very tempting to call out another person's shadow. That is one of the big no-nos of the gene keys. If you know your partner's gene keys, your role is to hold the city in your mind for them, not to bring the shadow to their attention. And as you begin to transmute your shadows, you're going to come into contact with your suffering. And as you come into contact with that suffering, you might want to dump it back on that other person, because remember, they're a reflection of you. You're in this suffering. And depending on where your frequency is at, it might just be a straight dump on that other person, or it might be, let me express everything I'm feeling inside to them. So you're not projecting it onto them, but you're expecting them to sit there and listen to your sadness and your suffering. It's natural to want to share those things. But if you're doing work to have a better relationship, then oftentimes it's better to share those things with a mentor, or to share those things with a friend, to share them with somebody that's got a little bit less of an emotional charge. It's not fair to dump things on your partner. Oftentimes we do that because we're looking for love. We're looking for them to come and give us a big hug and to say everything's going to be okay, but that's not their responsibility. That's your responsibility. The Venus sequence is about an internal shift. It's where you begin to notice that every interaction that you have is flavored by your internal state. And that your internal state is reflected by another. That doesn't mean that if your partner is mean, that's because you're mean. That's not what I'm saying here by a reflection or a projection. Doesn't mean that you're to blame for your partner's bad behavior. But what it does mean is that your reaction to that person's behavior, that is where the reflection is. If you cannot hold love as a reaction to anything that somebody said, it's because they are reflecting your lack of self-love back to you. Unconditional love is totally unaffected by circumstances, period, the end. If we think of the stories of Jesus, it did not matter what somebody did or what somebody said. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And you're going to get knocked out of love from time to time. That's part of the journey. That's part of the path. But in those moments, try to remember that everything that's happening is occurring inside of you. It's not something else that's happening outside. It's not a circumstance that occurred to you. It's not another person's behavior. It's you. Be wary of trying to crack open all your relationships at one time. So, all karma. Do not release all of that at once, because it will be overwhelming. It's so easy to do too much too quickly, too much too soon. And if you change everything at once, it's only going to be a surface level change anyway. So if all of this stuff starts to come out, there's no way. You only have so much attention, so much time. So you might be able to catch this thing and this thing, but all of these are going to go unattended, or you're just barely going to catch each of them. So this is what leads to shallow work. And what leads to transformation is taking one of these paths and following it for quite a long while, continuing to pull that thread. And then a natural conclusion will come and we can move on to the next piece of karma. That is how we do deep work. The Venus sequence is more about recovery time than it is about being perfect all the time. So like I just said, we try to hold unconditional love. Inevitably, we're going to fall from that unconditional love. And then we have a choice. We have a choice to stay in that victim state, to stay in that fear state, or we can shift back to the path. And what the Venus sequence does for us is it lowers the time for recovery, the time it takes to get back on the path. So what might have taken months or weeks now takes days or hours. And we get back to that frequency of unconditional love. I was watching a video, I believe it was yesterday, and it talked about the sort of trend of our healing journey. And what we end up with is we pull up into these higher frequencies, and then inevitably what happens is the universe sends us back down into our shadow state so that we can take those higher frequencies with us. And then we can do down here a bunch of transmutation because we have this higher frequency energy. And that allows us to come back up. And then again, we've tasted these new higher frequencies and we drop back down to transmute. And we come up and down. But over time, we can see this trend. I think so often we feel like we're falling off a cliff at these inflection points, and we're worried that we're never ever going to be able to get back on the path. But this is the path. It would be much easier if this straight line was how things went, but it's just not the case. And so our Venus sequence makes these downward dips shorter and shorter so that we can get back to those higher frequencies sooner and sooner. And karma, of course, leads to changes. But those changes come all on their own. So trying to do this method of trying to change everything all at once, one of the reasons it doesn't work is what I just said. The other reason that it doesn't work is because the universe has its own timing. And when it's time for you to unwind the karma and to learn the lessons, you'll unwind the karma and you'll learn the lessons. Your will doesn't matter. Not my will, but your will be done. When you truly believe that, everything gets so much easier in life. And I don't truly believe it yet, but I am damn close. Sometimes these shifts, the changes that are occurring, lead to a karmic closure. And karmic closure is just a natural ending. Sometimes we come to an end of a cycle. Sometimes a relationship comes to an end. A phase of our life closes. However, when that happens, the endings are always clean. They are not filled with drama. They can and typically do contain sadness. And that's totally normal and totally okay, but there's not ill will. There's not anger. There's not rage, because everyone involved in the situation knew that we were just coming to an end. Like I talked about earlier, when one person changes, it forces the other person to change because the relationship has changed. The relationship dynamic has shifted. And if that doesn't happen, if I change and after a long while the other person is still exactly the same, something's going to happen, right? There's going to be a conversation that occurs there. And in that conversation, either that person is going to realize that things are changing and they need to adapt and grow and change, or they're not willing to do that and this is coming to a close. It's coming to the end of a cycle. And that's why the endings are always clean, because everybody's on the same page. And those endings can be recognized for the lessons that they brought into your life. And you can be grateful for them. Sad, it's always hard for something, not always, but it's usually often hard for something to come to an end, especially a deep and loving relationship. At the same time, we can look at that and we can feel the growth that we had. We can feel the love that we had from the other person. That love lasts forever. The lessons last forever. And the beauty of a natural ending is that, remember, this pathway of karma, at one end, this is our sphere of attraction. So when our karma leads to an ending, our sphere of attraction calls in something new that we can then engage in the Venus work with again and grow. So a clean ending, a karmic close, leads to the sphere of attraction turning back in and calling in the next thing that will be at an even higher frequency. And if you go back to that graph that I drew, that is how over time our vibration raises. And these endings and beginnings also happen within the container of a relationship. So there are natural karmic endings to all cycles. And that could be the change of a job or the change of a school or the death of a parent. These are all cycles. And when you stick with that unwinding karma within a relationship, within that container, that is like gasoline for our spiritual growth. Because we are continually working through those things with the same person, with another person, and that allows us to go so deep. And that depth is what leads to spiritual realization. That depth is what leads us to unconditional love. It's what teaches us that unconditional love, that agape, that godlike love for another. I think that's it for now. Two things that I have for you. Number one is we have another wisdom call. So that is a call where we get together as a Gene Keys community and we share our insights, we share our wisdom. The last call, I had 24 people show up and the container was beautiful and so much wisdom was shared and tears were shed and people were helped. And the recording of that is on the channel. Check it out. I would love to have you there. The registration link I'll put in this description, but also it's on the community tab for the channel. So that's number one. Number two is I have started posting to Instagram again. I'm pretty bad at Instagram, I'm not gonna lie. But I'm not sure what's gonna happen over there. I'll share some Gene Key stuff. That's what I started sharing when I got back. But honestly, I wanna share me and who I am and what's important to me and what I do. So if you wanna talk or follow me in that way, I would love to see you on Instagram. My handle is Coach J Cohen. So at Coach J Cohen, which I've had that for a very long time. Coach used to be fitness coach. Now times have changed. And then third and finally is I have finally come around to sitting with a couple of people in a container to try and help them in their lives using the Gene Keys. And if that calls to you, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me, jay@locomotionfit.com. You can throw a comment in and we can try and connect that way. I have no idea where it'll go. I know that this wisdom has changed my life. And I've got a lot of experience, not just with this wisdom, but in my life at large, being with a very rough upbringing, drugs and alcohol and suicide attempts and all sorts of stuff in my family, to my own drug and alcohol use, becoming a heroin addict, to joining the Marine Corps and everything that that meant and entailed and taught me, to getting a degree in finance and realizing that I was chasing money, to continuing to chase money by opening a business, but justifying to myself that it was a different way because it was about something I was passionate about. But the driver was still to prove myself and to be successful, to shutting down that business because it no longer aligned with who I was, to taking a 6-month sabbatical and just sitting in the discomfort and uncertainty of what I was going to do after I hit that fork in the road and I shut down the business and I went through a divorce and a bankruptcy, to now starting to emerge out the other side of that thing. So couple all that life experience with an understanding of the gene keys, at least at a basic level. And I think that's a potent combination for an exploration with somebody else into things that could potentially change their lives forever. Took me a while to come to terms with that, but here we are. All right, guys, I hope that was helpful. Next up, we've got one of my favorite pathways, the pathway of intelligence, AKA the pathway of defense. Thank you for being here. Until next time.